Del Mar Hot Topics is proudly sponsored by Asteris Incorporated, the maker of Script Center and the industry's first provider of automated prescription pickup machines for retail pharmacies. Asteris, the best customer service begins with choice. Additional underwriting provided by Bacall & Sneed Architects, Jim Coleman State Farm Insurance, Del Mar Restoration, Dean Meredith Architecture, Smyer Architects. Businesses serving Del Mar from the heart of Del Mar. The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Del Mar TV Foundation or the City of Del Mar.
Del Mar Hot Topics, where we discuss issues that are important to you.
Building the American dream in Del Mar doesn't need to be a nightmare, but residents and those with the desire to build must dream with reason. Land use affects every Del Mar resident. I'm your host, T. Pat Stubbs, and you're watching Hot Topics.
No man is an island, but his home is his castle. Such is the tension that can pit neighbor against neighbor over custom construction in Del Mar. Planning and building is bounded by design review ordinances and the design review board.
And let the roll call show that we are fully constituted with 7 members.
Advocates justify the process with the enduring community identity of the city. But critics cite delays, added costs, and subjective judgments that make applicants feel like victims. How does Del Mar strike the balance between community plan and personal property rights to create a harmonious village? Where do the misconceptions end and the community building begin?
It's been said that building a beautiful home is hard. Building a beautiful home in Del Mar is near impossible, yet required. What is it that makes this process so frustrating for so many? Here to discuss the issues are property owner Howard Gadd, architects Don Countryman, Rob Quigley, and design review board member Wally Papsiak. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
So guys, floor area ratio, bulk and mass, basements, light wells, what is it about this process that makes it a minefield to navigate?
Well, I think that one of the things, I think it's a very complicated process. There's a lot of rules that are difficult to follow. There's I think a lot of neighborhood issues that get into play that tend to sway how the process comes out at the other end. I think that's probably one of the bigger issues. It's a very democratic process, but maybe it's too democratic, in my opinion. And I think that the rules are very FAR, the floor area ratio, is very restrictive, probably one of the most restrictive here in California in terms of the amount of square footage that you can get on your lot.
Yeah, I've got to jump in here for a minute because we do live in a democracy, and too democratic, I can hardly understand what could ever be too democratic.
Well, you realize why Paris is so beautiful?
Explain to us.
It used to be a hodgepodge of windy streets and buildings, and then a dictator came in, plowed through those beautiful boulevards, and it's been a wonderful city ever since. So you may be right.
Well, I think we all, if you're living here in Del Mar, I mean, you want to keep the character of the neighborhood. I think we all live here because of that, and so I don't think we want to change that, but I think it's just how it's implemented and the process that you have to go through.
It's not so much how it's implemented, it's that the process has become so Byzantine. All the little tiny rules, all the finicky things that design review boards spend most of their time talking about is crazy. I mean, what you have to do is focus on the broad issues, on the really big, important things, and hold it at that. Don't start arguing about how wide a fence board is or whether that window is beautifully proportioned or not. So it doesn't work.
From my perspective, it's a very emotional process because, yes, there's all these rules and there are a lot of nits and lights, but you build so much equity into your planning. If you're the owner, that you really aren't expecting it to be rejected by people, rejected by your neighbors, and rejected by people you don't even know.
This is your baby. It's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. You have an ugly baby.
And because it's contentious at times, I think board members like to be in a position to try to resolve those sort of issues, and they can tend to lean towards mediation rather than decision making. They're decision makers. They're not mediators. There's nothing in the design review ordinance that specifies how the neighbor process should go, as it does not specify the characteristics of the applicants. This is project-based review, and it needs to stay project-based review.
But isn't the outcome of everything that's been going on in the Del Mar design review process, is it worth the effort?
Well, I think that you have, you know, there are projects that get approved that do follow the rules and finally get through the process that I think don't have the best design. And I think others that have very good design have a difficult time getting through. And again, I think it depends on, again, it's a neighborhood by neighborhood. One house on this block where neighbors are more reasonable, it can be approved. You take the same property on the next street where there's what I would consider more unreasonable neighbor behavior, and you have a very difficult time. So it's very spotty. It's very spotty.
Now, I'm not an architect, and we have two very, very well-renowned architects here. How could a project that goes through a process like this be harmed by the process?
Well, you know, my favorite comment about design review in general is that design review makes bad architects a little bit better, and it makes very good architects much worse. And that's the yin and the yang of it. That's the good and the bad, is that design review actually, by definition, homogenizes buildings and projects. It takes everybody down to sort of a mediocre level, meaning that it also brings the worst buildings up to that mediocre level. But so a lot of great architecture is lost because of design review.
But there are rules within the community that need to be followed. You have the design review ordinance in order to...
But that's the problem. They aren't rules. They're more like notions. They're not clear-cut, simple, quantifiable criteria. And that would be my argument. That's what makes good design review. What happens is it degenerates into someone's idea of beauty. And if I could say one thing clearly, it's that you cannot legislate beauty. Cannot be legislated.
Well, I think that the rules need to be a little more objectively applied in some of the areas, say like the bulk and mass, very good example, where there should be more of a quantifiable amount of, say, exterior decks that you might be able to have. I mean, the floor area ratio is set, but the embellishments to the home that certain people would say, well, that it looks too big, there's too much to it. It's a very subjective issue that when you go through and design a home, you don't know how you're going to come out the other end. And basically, it's like walking through a minefield, and you don't know what the end result is going to be. And the architects, of course, spend a lot of their clients' money trying to get through it. And
the question is it worth it? Certainly, it's preserves some of the built environment, probably consistent with the community plan. However, it comes with a cost, and the cost is retention of neighbors' relationships and neighborhood character with respect to how a community feels and how it lives. And certainly the problem is that neighborhood relationships and those neighborhood interactions are not legislated, they're not advised, and they go in any particular way. Many times residents and neighbors and potential adversaries are enabled too greatly in terms of what they think they can do. And
you know, there's another issue that's germane to this, and that is that I find often the plans and the models are misinterpreted by the design review board. I can remember an early experience I had in Palos Verdes, which had one of the first design review boards. The review board didn't like a particular building I designed and gave me a set of reasons why they didn't, none of which made any sense to me whatsoever. So I hired a different renderer. We drew the same building, but the guy had a different hand. He was a watercolorist. The other guy did some other kind. And it was passed with no changes whatsoever.
And wow, that's a great point to finish it up on. Let's go straight to a Del Mar hot tip.
One of the mistakes that a lot of out-of-towners make: don't show up at the DRB in a suit and tie. Don't bring your lawyers with you. And don't think that you're going to be able to buy your way through the process or strong arm your way through the process, because Del Mar is a neighborhood, it's a community, and all that is going to do, it's going to build resentment for your project and what you want to do.
I'm T-Pat Stubbs, and you're watching Del Mar Hot Topics. I'm joined by Howard Gadd, Don Countryman, Rob Quigley, and Wally Papsiak, and we're about to explore changes to Del Mar's design review ordinances. But first, let's take a look at what Del Mar residents had to say about the design review process.
Property values are barrier enough for some families who come to Del Mar. But the biggest obstacle might be a lack of preparation and local knowledge.
I think the smartest move that we made was that before we even purchased the property, we consulted with a local architect who knew about the rules for Del Mar, knew about what might be possible and might not be possible in the area, and he was a fantastic resource, good person as well, and decided to buy the property. Very happy with our location, then got ready and had already heard, living in Del Mar, the horror stories about the DRB, but we had good friends here who'd lived here for a long time and had built themselves, and they kind of coached us through it. To go in, our architect suggested that we photograph so we had an idea. We actually spoke to some of the neighbors and asked, what do you consider your primary view corridors? We want to be mindful of that before we even start our drawings. It ended up helping enormously, I think. When we purchased, we let people know. I wrote them notes to everybody surrounding the property. We've been Del Mar residents for a long time. We're looking at building in the area. We want to include you as our neighbors in this whole process. So please, if you have any questions or concerns, please let us know. Here's our home phone number. Here's our email address. Call us. Yes, this was before we even started with story polls or drawings.
Community members are hoping to shape the process, but what impact will their recommendations really have?
The rules work both ways. When you're trying to build a project, they tend to hinder you. When somebody else is trying to build one in front of you, they protect you. So we're all in the same boat here. They tend to protect you as much as hinder you. I think the process helps keep the community sense. Del Mar is one of the only communities that is similar today to what it was 20 years ago. You can go to every other part of San Diego and not even know where you grew up. It's that much different.
How do homeowners find their way through the process? Those that do have a lot of wisdom to impart to the uninitiated, but their education comes at a cost. DRB members, architects, homeowners, entire neighborhoods are affected by the decision-making process.
I would strongly encourage it. It's tough to embrace some of the criticisms that you get or some of the suggestions that you get, but it definitely was to our benefit. To be perfectly honest, we went back to the DRB with changes maybe 3 or 4 months later, and it passed. And the same people who had argued against the house spoke in favor of it because we incorporated their input in all of the design changes. So we were real open with them, talked to them, worked with them. And to be perfectly honest, we got a bigger, smarter house. You have to be mindful of the process. They don't want people pushing every single extreme. Those are guidelines. If you're going to push to the edge of the guidelines, yes, people are going to want to pull you back a little bit. But if you show right from the get-go that you're willing to do a little give and take and that you understand the spirit, I guess, of the restrictions, not just the limits of the restrictions, I think you're in a much better spot.
Spirit of the restrictions, not just the limit of the restrictions.
Well, it's difficult to know what that really means, and it certainly will vary depending upon the person with whom you're speaking. I think that can be a real pitfall with respect to trying to understand what the fair and reasonable application of the ordinance really is.
But isn't the spirit of the restrictions to build a better community?
You know, it's important to have an idea clearly articulated about what the community is, really how it envisions itself. The problem is everyone interprets that in a very different way. And that's why you got to have limitations. And in my mind, a good review board would have a very clear statement like that they would pass out to the architects and the homeowners, but then they would have a very simple, very concise set of restrictions. Maybe 3, maybe 4, that's it.
Well,
nothing more.
Let's talk about that. It's my understanding that there's been a coming together of the architectural community and the community at large through workshops in the City Council and trying to develop a better planning process. Can you tell us more about that, Howard?
Well, I think there has been, we've come a long way the last year or so, and I think there have been, there's been an understanding on the part of the City Council that some changes need to be made, some simplifications, some things to make it easier for an architect to be able to get through the process and for their client to understand, you know, what they can do and come to a conclusion a lot easier than they have now. With the latest workshop that they had, they ratified, I think it was October 15th, I think some very good changes, are very favorable in terms of a 2-step process. When you go in, you can pay extra fees, and you can have just really very schematic plans, put up story poles, at least get the view issue out of the way, because that's one of the biggest issues here. And the way the process works now, you have to have a complete set of plans all the way down to the, you know, where your lighting is and all the rest of it, and you go in, you don't know what you're going to get. You may have to take the whole thing apart, and you've got $25,000 worth of plans that you can, that money's gone.
Now, it's my understanding there's 34 different changes coming forward for the design review ordinance, one of which is to actually add an ex officio member to add a professional onto the panel. Do you think that that will help out the situation?
Well, it may help some, but I think it's going to be very difficult to define the role of that person. You know, if they provide technical expertise at some points, that will be helpful. But it's difficult with respect to the crossover when their advice becomes opinion, influencing their opinion as to the quality and worth of a project.
You know, I found the professionals very helpful when they play the role of interpreter. Looking at a set of drawings and blueprints and even renderings is very, very difficult because it's not built yet. And lay people who don't do this for a living are often very surprised at what the real building looks like compared to what they thought it was going to look like based on the drawings. And the architect sometimes can act as an interpreter and help people understand what they're seeing.
I think what we're talking about really is, I come from a technology background, and we're talking about the user interface. We have a process, and it's complex, and there's different bodies, and there's binders full of rules. So how do we stand back and build a simplified process where the user interface has been designed around helping people right from the get-go? And they could be people that are recently retired and not extremely wealthy, want to do a major remodel, or they could be a young couple with a family, and they can somehow get through this without spending an arm and a leg, get it done in a timely fashion, and not have it, you know, one woman, I was told at a dinner party one time, had a heart attack during a DRB meeting because she was so wrapped into this. She found out the next morning, her doctor took a test and said, you had a mild heart episode.
She must have had her plans approved immediately.
No, she didn't.
There were some good changes that have been made in this last go-round, but one of the things that's still lacking, in my opinion, is that we still don't have a process by which those residents that have concerns over a project have an educational process of their own. We have board members that are going through training and additional training. We have applicants that have hired professionals to help them through the process. But the people that are there taking issue with a building, in my opinion, many times they're too enabled because they don't understand the ordinances. And I believe they need some education.
So in order to enact the spirit of the restrictions, we have to educate everybody on what the spirit of the restrictions actually are, because we're all bringing our own life experiences into each individual situation.
Or I'll ask the group, is there an ombudsman that works on behalf of the property owner? Someone who can help cut through red tape. I know you use different people. You can use the staff. You can go have coffee with a DRB member beforehand and learn some of the ropes. Hire a good architect, and you'll learn bits and pieces. But I think an ombudsman function that can help slice and dice the process for you.
That would help, but my point is the process needs to be so simple that you don't even need that sort of thing.
It's too complicated.
It's way too Byzantine.
Too complicated.
And it doesn't create better buildings.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that it has to be simplified. And again, the steps that have been taken here the last couple months, I think, go a long way to helping that process. There's still a lot, I think, that still can be done, but it's a recognition on the part of the council that through the years, all the complaints they've gotten. I think if you ask people that have been through the process, how did you feel the process worked? I think you'd find it'd be very interesting to do a survey and see how many people felt that it was a fair, objective process.
As well as asking the neighbors as how they felt the process worked.
Sure. Well, I think you have to look at it both ways, but I think that I think we are heading in the right direction, having forums like this, having the workshops, at least the recognition that there needs to be some changes, and some of those changes are in the offing right now, and so I'm happy about that.
Ultimately, I think the great equalizer here is the board. The board, the tenor of the board has changed dramatically over the 25 years I worked in town, and I think it's important to try to stabilize that through education, through training processes, through understanding, through historic perspective, through guidance by council of things like percentage of view that's reasonably be blocked. I've seen it in my time where someone would say 5% is too much and 50% is okay, depending upon a particular board member. It's been a huge variation, and that's a moving target that's just untenable. It's so difficult to work with for everyone in town.
Now, Wally, you're a homeowner first. Right. And you lost that title last evening when you you attended your first design review board meeting.
I've got a whole 24 hours under my belt, right, as an expert.
But I think last night was the longest board meeting of the year. Tell us about your experience.
Well, I have to say I was fairly nervous about it, because when you go through the training, you're told you're part of a judicial body of a sort, and that's awesome responsibility. And having the emotional experience I had going through the process and finally being approved, I had a lot of empathy for the people. And I have to tell you, what amazed me or impressed me was the personal commitment of the board, the time they put in. I know the time I put in, but the time they put in, looking at each of the plans, visiting the sites, and then the spirit. What I saw is a sense of urgency last night, and I don't know if that's typical. But we actually took two items which I thought were going to come back for review, and we asked the architects to make changes. And one of them sketched them right up in front of everybody, and the other one went away for a half hour, came back.
I'm sure these two architects are cringing over that thought right now.
I don't know about you, I'm horrified.
Well, it was minor. It was relatively minor stuff, but it was going to mean the difference. I was told before I went through the process, if you wait 1 month, it's going to cost you $5,000. Every time you postpone it, they say, well, bring it back next month with, make some changes, cost you $5,000. Well, I believe them now, having gone through it.
That's a concern.
And I saw a lot of sense, and it wasn't me, it was the other board members. I saw a lot of sense of trying to get something done with several items.
Mm-hmm. Well, Howard, in the time that we have left here, you recently went through the process as well. And did you feel that everybody did their homework on your project?
Well, I felt the staff did a good job, the staff of the city. I don't have any problem with that. I think that again, it had to do more with the local neighborhood creating problems, probably more so than the DRB. And we had, of course, a lot of other issues that we don't need to get into right now that drug it out for about 1.5 years, but that was a whole other thing we don't need to get into right now, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. So,
we'll get into primary living areas and view corridors again in a minute.
Just a lot of little things in the ordinance and the way it's applied that I think don't really need to be there. They just complicate it. They're more of an impediment. I think that it should be more of encouragement people improve their property and not a discouragement, which it is.
I was told that I lived in an R2 area, and we really want more households before I went through the process. And it sure didn't seem like we were encouraging more households.
That's another good point to wrap it up on. And let's take a quick break now. And when we come back, we're going to give you a few more hot tips for building in Del Mar, and we're going to put them on the table. Stay with us now for more Hot Topics.
very preliminary stages, find out exactly what will be required of the entire project. In other words, access issues, fire escape issues, things that may change the design at a later time. Make sure those issues get discovered early. In terms of cost, if it's caught before the plans are finally approved, if it's caught in the plan check process, it's just more architectural engineering and plan check fees. Those can be in the thousands. It doesn't have to be, I mean, those actually do run towards the thousands, but they don't run to the tens of thousands, which they would if it was missed until the final inspection was done.
With a minute left, give me your final thoughts.
T-Pat, we got to create a user-friendly interface to the whole process just to get things done.
You?
Implement the concepts in the DRB workshops. I think things will run a lot smoother.
This is not a design by committee process. Neighbor complaints and concerns should be cast among all the other constraints in a project and then apply the ordinance.
And of course,
bad design review is in fact designed by committee. And good design review is to put together a very simple set of quantifiable rules. Bulk, view can be quantified geometrically, mathematically.
That's fantastic. We've had a wonderful show here this evening. We've heard about benevolent dictatorships. We've heard about simplicity. We've heard about the new processes that are coming into place. I'm your host, T. Pat Stubbs. Join us next week for another Del Mar Hot Topics.
Catering provided by En Fuego Cantina and Grill. Promotional materials donated by Clone Duplicating and Printing. Copies of this program are available from the Del Mar Library, 1309 Camino Del Mar. Del Mar Hot Topics is proudly sponsored by Asteris Incorporated, the maker of Script Center and the industry's first provider of automated prescription pickup machines for retail pharmacies. Asteris, the best customer service begins with choice. Additional underwriting provided by Bacall & Sneed Architects, Jim Coleman State Farm Insurance, Del Mar Restoration, Dean Meredith Architecture, Smire Architects. Businesses serving Del Mar from the heart of Del Mar.